let's see. Sign in, meeting passcode. Okay, there it is. Okay, let me do all this right here. Numeric passcode for telephone systems. Passcode. Okay, let's see if it'll, let me see if I can copy that. All right, let me write that down. Do. And it says FRJ. All right. Are you ready? See if you can try this one. If it is, I'll email it. So it's asking for a passcode. All right. Yeah. Okay. So try this. Are you ready to put it in? Wish you was lost. So, no. All right. Lowercase f, capital R. Lowercase j, the number 5. Uppercase T and uppercase P. That's what it says it is. When I click on the information. All right, great. So what I'm going to do is send that to everybody right now. Send just okay. You know, it's crazy that last night I was on this and I didn't have any problems. So at some point they'll probably just cancel it all out. All right, we're back. But I've been trying to convert this over to and just pay for it myself. Um, and I'm not trying to cause anybody any problem, but the problem is it doesn't want to bring all my stuff that I've got everywhere, all these meetings I've got scheduled, all the info. It'd take me 3 days to update if I can't use the same links. I've got dissertation links, I've got all kinds of stuff. Um, and when they decide they wouldn't pay anymore, but I'll get it fixed tonight. If I'd known it was going to require a passcode, I'd already had it fixed, but I had planned to tackle it tomorrow. I didn't want to try to start tearing it apart before I had class tonight. You know, something would go bad.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was I've got class in person this weekend, so I won't have to use it again but I better try to take care of it tonight. There's always something at Gardner Webb. And now I'll be surprised if Blackboard stays up because they've got a storm there. They just put out an emergency warning and they'll shut the servers down here in a few minutes. We won't have any Blackboard access, I'd say, about time class starts. They think class is over at 3 o'clock when the undergraduates get out. And so I suspect we'll probably lose our Blackboard tonight. But if we don't, if we do, that'll be okay. We'll get it. All right. Hey, so let me share my screen. Screen share. You go back. So, yeah. Severe thunderstorm. Yeah. All right. Let me get in here. Ah.
I learned a lot from Carter's presentation.
Did you watch it?
Yeah.
Well, excellent. What did you learn from Carter's? That's how I wanted to start tonight. What did you learn? It's about what you know. That's what I said. He's not
Yeah,
a slick presenter. You can tell he doesn't work in the central office and do presentations for a job. That's not his deal. But he knew his stuff.
right. And I think what resonated with me was the organization of it
Hmm.
from the start to the middle and
Hmm.
how it flowed, the connections. Um, I mean, down to even his terms, the
Hmm.
selected terms that he chose. Um, and even when they at the end, when the question was asked about bias, um, so I hadn't even thought about that, but that was a good question. um just the overall of knowing that he had done the legwork. He was able to speak about it. He was able to talk about the theories and how everything connected, and it really flowed. It piqued my interest.
Hmm.
Just hearing him talk about, and then as well as I could tell his passion about the research, and how it was going to potentially make an impact on his district.
Hmm. Yeah. Now, I told you I would send you Casey's, but see, everybody that watches Casey's gets enthralled with just the presentation. Casey makes as good a literature connection, especially in her final. But what I don't want people I don't want people to think that if you can look good, and and look polished and professional and have a real snazzy looking PowerPoint, that's what matters. Those are the least important things. Carter grabs your attention because he speaks from his heart. You can tell
Hmm.
he means it. And
Hmm.
he's read that stuff and he knows it. He's not a slick presenter.
Hmm.
That's part of the charm. The thing about Casey, she's in the Department of Education in South Carolina. Their equivalent, Sandy knows, of our DPI is their Department of Ed. She's fairly high level in that, and she was mine from the beginning, like Carter. And hers was just her final was this. She didn't even list, much less stutter or stumble or mispronounce not one word. It was like watching somebody, but she's on TV all the time. And so she has that presence, and she never misses, she never stumbles, she never misses a word ever. But that's what she does for a living. And she's looks like a model, dresses like a model, got that look. Yeah, she's got the meat, but nobody hears or remembers what she says. She's a talking head like on TV. Now, I'm not being pejorative, or I'm not discounting her skill and ability. She's whip smart, and she knows her stuff as well. But she's the person that you hire to stand out front and distract everybody. Yeah, they get all caught up in that. Carter is the guy that you can see how hard it is, but you can there he doesn't make it look like it's just fall off the bed out of the bed easy. You can see that he's had to work at it, but he's got it. Did any of y'all did I go over his chapter 2 with y'all last week? I kind of went over that with y'all. I looked back and knew that I did on those questions. Again, I can't I make this motion every day of my life. I'm tired of making this motion, but I'll continue to make it. The funnel has got to go in. You start with a topic and you just keep on drilling down, drilling down, drilling down until you're the expert in that topic. You're the expert in intervention. You're the expert in dropouts at the state level, at the local level, at the national. You are the expert. That's what the literature is trying to make you be. You need to be well read and up to date on what's going on in the literature. Now, I'm gonna use myself as the bad example. I mean, everybody's got to have a purpose in life. When I did my dissertation a long time ago, I of course did a Hertzberg dissertation. It was a little more than what we do now because it was quantitative only at Chapel Hill, so it was a little bit more. That's immaterial. Now, 20 years, it's been how many years? 30, 35 years since my dissertation. About 20, 15, 15 years, I'd say. About 15 years after my dissertation. Um, Around the turn of the century, about 25 years ago, people started, there was a lot of literature that tried to discount, discredit, disrespect, to move on from Hertzberg. Um, One political party, especially, that we can make people work. That this whole notion of if we cut their benefits, if we cut that people won't leave over bad bosses or bad conditions because they can't afford to. So Hertzberg was wrong that you don't have to treat people well, that you don't have to compensate them well, you don't have to treat them well. If you keep them down and that they won't go no matter how bad you treat them, if they need the job. What happened during the pandemic? Some 20 years after that. So Hertzberg kind of waned a lot of those years, but since the pandemic, what did we find out? We cut unemployment down to 3 weeks, and didn't matter. People still didn't go back to work. Um, people now will not work for bad bosses and bad conditions. It's never been more apparent in my career. And so now Hertzberg is just, people are like, well, yeah, Hertzberg was right all along. People were manipulating and lying and pretending that it wasn't seminal work because they didn't agree with it. And so that's where I'm headed with this. Seminal work is seminal work, whether you agree with it or not. That's not the important piece. You need to track it back. What is the seminal work in the problem or the areas that you're interested in? Who are the people who started that and who wrote about it and whose theories kind of launched that idea? You need to make sure that, and so those are the theorists that we pick for your theoretical and conceptual framework. But you need to know the well that all of this stuff sprung from. Yes, yeah. The last 5 years of literature is very important so that you're well read. But you got to know your seminal work. And again, it may be controversial. I mean, if a lot of people don't like critical race theory or bell hooks or Crenshaw or whatever. I don't have a dog in that fight. We're going to defend one next week in EDCI. One of my ladies, Kendra's been with me forever. We're doing a Kimberly Crenshaw bell hooks one next week. Now, I don't, but because you don't agree with it or don't like it or it doesn't fit your political, that doesn't mean that it's not seminal work in that part of the world, in that literature. So please remember that when you go back to these theorists, there's going to be people who say good things and bad things. That's okay. Have the entire discussion in there, but make sure you drill down till you get to that. In the last 3 years since the pandemic's been over, you get these little. If my dissertation, of course, is copyrighted by Chapel Hill, but when people access it online, you get these little dings that come from your email that your works. I get 3 or 4 a day now. People have gone back and pulled my dissertation because it's a Hertzberg, one of the first ones in North Carolina that talked about teacher retention when we first started thinking about that as a thing back in the 80s. And so it's my work is not Hertzberg and it's not nearly as good, but I have one of those seminal works in North Carolina. And so I get dinged a lot. You need to know that stuff. Who is this seminal work? Who is the theorist? And then who did a lot of work, especially if it's in North Carolina, if you're doing something. Who in your state started this stuff? All right. So that's that important piece. All right. So we're going to be together next weekend. We've already determined that. We're good to go on that. Y'all are going to start with your presentations. I'll do my deal on Saturday. Y'all will have your presentations on Sunday. Um, Anybody have any questions on our presentations? All right. Let me go to my screen share. All right. Mhm. Loretta, you've got 739 tonight. Is that us?
Yes, that's us.
We're burning daylight. Let's go.
All righty.
I'll turn my camera off so you can get yours on. We'll see if we can get done in that 40-minute time limit we're on tonight, but I'll get my Zoom fixed and we can go back to an hour. Y'all probably don't want me to, though.
Let
Y'all
me
want to
see.
keep it on the
Hold
40
on.
minute time limit.
Hold on. Let me find it. We'll go right here.
Mhm.
Go back to Zoom. Share my screen. Am I sharing the screen?
It's coming. It's trying. There it goes. You got it.
All right. So we're still in the book planning educational facilities. I'm doing let me move this out of the way. I'm doing chapters 7, 8, and 9, which are chapter 7 is long range planning and financial planning. Chapter 8 is development of the capital improvement program. And then chapter 9 is developing educational specifications. So for chapter 7, um, the first thing it talks about is that in order to have this long range planning, you should have periodic meetings. You're going to be planning and problem solving for activities, and then for planning for the school year. Actually, it's planning over several years. And then coordination of efforts is best done through planning council of the school district. Usually reports are directly, and there's only, even though you're planning for several years, you're only you only get funded 1 year at a time. So there are two major aspects of the operation for when you're talking about financial planning for the long range planning, and that is your day-to-day operations and then the long-term capital projects. So there are several different, you have to put together a funding package. In the funding package, you need to know the sources of where you're going to get the money from, and then how you're going to apply the money once you get it. And it should be together in one cohesive plan. There forward. So when you're doing the financial planning, there's two different portions to the financial planning, like we talked about before. It's the operations part, and then there's the capital projects part. And the funds are based on how they are obtained and how they're going to be used. So for the operational projects, you get funding. You can get state contributions based on a formula. The local contributions are based on taxes, and then the federal contribution, if they're available, because they're not always available, they can have federal funds as well. The difference between the capital projects and the operational projects is that the capital expenditures, you can use them for funding renovations, for purchasing items such as the school sites, buses, and major equipments. You can also use it to keep a building in good repairs from falling apart, and there's more flexibility in the spending. When it comes to the capital projects, they have similar fundings, but they have single bond issue for new construction. There's annual operation budget for existing things, and then there's no flexibility in the use. The funds must be used as they were stated when you apply for the funds, or similar to what you applied for. So you can't use it for something that's totally different. And it can be used for daily operation. It cannot be used for daily operations of funds. So when we talk about the federal funding, according to the United States Constitution and the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, they have this clause called the Reserve Clause. So the funding for federal funding they don't have to provide federal funding for school buildings and building things for the school system. because of that reserve clause. And that reserve clause just says that anything that's not depicted in the Constitution, then that falls onto the state. And so education is not part of the Constitution as far as the building of something. So there's limited funding by the federal government, and they're not responsible for education, program initiatives, and personal development funding. There are some special cases where they provide some funding, and those are usually cases where there was a natural disaster, something that has to do with war or military, and other specific things that has to do with whether it is it for the welfare of the entire state, well-being of the entire state. So when we talk about the one in 1797, that was the initial one. It says the first efforts for the federal government to assist local funding was the Northwest Ordinance. That was the very first time. Then they had another one for the Landrum in 1941. That was immediately following World War II. There was another one in 1963. That one was some funding to provide funds for construction of vocational schools. That was a plan for planning and construction, and there wasn't enough funds in there to adequately do what they wanted to do, because they were trying to build vocational schools all throughout the country, and very few buildings were constructed using that funding. Then they also had one in 1965 for Appalachian Regional Development Act. That was for construction funds only. There are no construction funds, and it has not been under the legislation. They gave a very little bit of funds. They had started out in 1976 with $10 million available, and then it went down thereafter based on it wasn't enough funds because the geographical location of where it was, the $10 million were not enough funds to fund everything that they needed. And then the last one up there was 1974 to 1983. Well, it began the Emergency Relief Act. That was construction funds for, there was a big flood that happened that destroyed a lot of the construction in Virginia and West Virginia. So those funds were to rebuild after that flood and restore some of those infrastructures. So those are some examples of special cases where the federal government will provide funding for local school structures. There are also some funding through bonds. You get limited assistance to improving schools and facilities. You get tax credit bonds. There are no interest on the bonds to build facilities, so school systems must apply. And those 4 bonds are the Qualified School Construction Bond. That was between 2010 and 2012, and it said that they had about 400 school systems and states that issued these bonds. Then there was the Qualified Zone Academy bonds. Those funds were local school systems to repair their schools. There was the Qualified Energy Conservation Bond, and that conservation bond was to fund local school systems to reduce energy consumption. And then the last bond was the Build America Bond, which was a low interest bond to finance construction and to modernize the schools. Then we went to state funding. And the state funding, they share some responsibility for providing some of education for citizens, but not the sole burden for it. So again, that reserve clause exempted the federal government, but it pushed it down to the state. So they do provide some funding, and you can tell by the funding that they give how important education is to that state. So in some states they give more money, in some states they give less money, based on the citizens and how important they feel like education is to their state. The states can opt out of funding for school buildings, however. So they don't provide significant amount of money to the local school buildings. And the reason why they do not is they said it was for two reasons. The first one is they believe that the local school district or the local school, the county should provide the funding because those are their specific citizens that they're housing in those schools, so they should have that responsibility. And the second was that because the building is built in that district and the local school district holds the title to those buildings, then they should bear the responsibility for building those buildings. So the funding for new construction ranges from none in some places, and then they said in Hawaii, they get full funding for construction of school buildings. So only about 75% of the states in the United States provide some sort of state assistance for building of schools. And then the funding for those buildings fall into two categories. Either they're going to be grant and aid. The grants and aid, you do not have to pay back. Sometimes there'll be gifts. Sometimes they'll have some things that they have to do, such as they have the local school district might have to match the funds that were given. Sometimes it is a financial aid factor, and they may compensate for the wealth or lack of wealth in their district. Sometimes it's a capital overlay for debt services. Several different things go into the grants and aid, but the biggest thing is that they don't have to be paid back. For the second one is for loan programs. And in the loan programs, of course, you do have to pay those back. However, they are secured by the title of the property in which the school is located. And it's normally over about a 20-year period. They have low interest rates and they have favorable payback conditions.
All right. Loretta, in North and South Carolina, do we do any grant and aid or do we do bonds and loans?
I think we do bonds and
We
loans.
do bonds and loans. So the loans understanding is that's when you let a bond in your district and the county commissioners have to approve it. It goes on the ballot. And then the local voters vote up or down, yes or no on the bonds. And if the bond is passed, the referendum is passed, then the state loans the money at favorable rates. But it's not as easy as just going to the state and say, I want a loan. The
Right.
school district can't do that. The county commissioners have to give permission to put a bond referendum on the ballot. And only if it's passed by the voters will the state then do the bond and do the loan. Now, again, I've said this before, that priority list of what you're going to build with that bond money is not binding. And it's usually a hoax or a fake or completely misleading. And that tends to not make people want to vote for bonds because they all have a building in their neighborhood that they never get. But also remember that the county commissioners have to have a plan because they're the ones that in effect are getting the loan from the state, not the district. The county commissioners are getting the loan. And what do they have to show in order to get that bond? They have to show how they're going to increase revenue to pay that loan back to the state. And again, what are the two ways that we increase the revenue in order to pay for a bond? There's two ways.
Taxes?
Property taxes or sales tax.
Mm-hmm.
The county commissioners have to submit a plan that they're going to raise property taxes by a certain millage or percentage, or they're going to add a certain percentage, 1/2 cent, 1/4 cent, full cent to the sales tax in their district to show how they can pay that loan back. But remember, the school board does not apply for that loan. The county commissioners apply for the bond if the referendum passes, and they must show the plan on how they're going to pay it back. So again, it's not under the control of the school board or the school district. The county commissioners are the one that secure the loan.
Okay.
All right. Continue on. Excellent.
All right, so then the last one is the local government funding, and it has the largest responsibility for funding for construction of the of schools. It has limited tax base. It's basically from the local real estate tax, and it puts a heavy burden on the citizens in the district. Um, the debt has to be paid over several years, and so it's usually passed down from one generation to the next. So the buildings are in the buildings are legal in all states. Not all methods of raising these funds are legal in all states. So they have a pay as you go, and the pay as you go is that you can only build when you have the funds available to do so. And so the funds are um, normally spent in interest payments from 40, it says from 40 to 200%. And so today, no schools are using this method of raising construction funds. And then the other one is the sinking funds. And the sinking funds is they're like savings accounts. You place the funds in there and you just leave it in there until you have the amount you need to build. But it usually takes several years in order for you to accumulate enough money to build. And it says that the account, it doesn't draw enough interest to keep up with the inflation. So it doesn't grow large enough in order to construct it. So it's not really a useful source of funding for the local school system in most states. And then in some states, it is illegal. And then they had the general obligation bonds, which is also called municipal bonds. This is what the traditional method for funding for the local government, and it's a and it finances capital construction. It is backed by the full faith and credit of the local government unit or the school system, and it has to be voter approved um, for the sale of the bonds. I think that might be what you were talking about.
That's
So then
exactly
they
what I was talking about.
and so there's four types of bonds that the local government agencies can choose from. There's the sinking funding. Well, no, that. There's the sinking funding. There's the serial, and there's the term and the amortized bonds. So the term bonds are issued a predetermined period, and then they have the sinking bonds, which are also term periods. In the serial bonds, they are various. They have various times during the life of you pay for them various times during the life of the bond. So you pay for it actually every 5 years. Then you have the amortized, which is a serial bond, and there is no balloon payments, and each bond over for it's retiring part of each bond over the course of the life. So it's semi-annual payments. Then we go to chapter 8, and chapter 8 is talking about development of capital improvement program is proposed actions to accommodate the number of students in the district, and it spanned over 5 to 7 years. So a school system always has more capital improvement projects than it has the funds to pay for it. And the most important factor is the need um, of how many students you need to house, and if you're gonna, are you getting more students than you have space, or are you losing a lot of students and you have an overabundance of space? Um, then we have talk about that. Then it talked about the capital improvement budget, which is different from the capital improvement program. The actual budget is what are we authorized to spend to fund the capital improvement program. And so the different kinds of capital projects are new school fundings, when you want to add additions to the school, when you want to make major renovations or improvements, if you want to purchase a building or a new site. And then the last one is when you have what I stated before, a surplus of classrooms because you have a declining number of students in your district. All right, and that leads us to chapter 9, which is talking about the development educational specifications, which tell in the specifications actually tells the architect the type of program that you're having in your building, what kind of needs do you need to effectively run that program, the space needed, the furniture and equipment, services and utilities needed. So they gave an example of if you have a kindergarten classroom, you might need a soft area. So you might need carpeting space in front of a board if you're going to have a reading time. If you're going to do a lot of painting and a lot of woodworking or other kind of arts and craft, you might need to have sinks and those kinds of things. Of course, in kindergarten and pre-kindergarten classrooms, pre-kindergarten especially, you got to have certain specifications for door sizes. You might need handicap spots if you're servicing students with disabilities. So then architects need to know all this information, and all that information is part of the educational specs. Normally, whenever you do this, if you have a bad educational specification, then of course they attribute that to bad or lack of leadership. Mm-hmm. Because either the principals can do this or the superintendent, but they most of the time said in a medium-sized district or a small district, the superintendent or the assistant superintendent. I guess we would be considered a smaller to medium-sized district. So ours would probably fall under the assistant superintendent of operations that would have this particular duty.
Yeah.
But the final approval is for the educational specifications should be the school board. But the most important thing for this specification is the capacity of the building, and because the capacity relates directly to how much money you have to spend. And the capacity also, I don't know whether they do projected capacity, because a lot of times when they start these projects and they give these educational specifications, by the time they build the building, it's already too small for the people that are coming into it. I've seen in a lot of districts where they build new buildings, and by the time all the students get in there, it's overpopulated already, and then they have to start putting modular units behind it, mm-hmm, or doing some kind of add-on projects. So
I believe Paula talked about that in her district down in Burgaw and Pender. Mm-hmm. That happens quite often, but we'll talk about that when we're together. Remind me to talk about that one. All right, we got about a minute left on this one.
That's it.
So it's just in time. So let me, if you'll stop your share, I'll kind of close this out. If we go out, I created another link, but we won't need it. The thing that we'll need to talk about when we're together, I want to talk specifically, and y'all need to be doing some research. And Loretta just hit on it. Why is it that we open schools already over capacity? You need to look into that. And the second thing is, while technology is considered capital funding, how is technology? What are the alternatives to funding technology other than just capital? Y'all need to look into those two things, and we'll talk about that on the Saturday that we are together. So I will see you Saturday week at back in where was it we met? Dogwood upstairs. And so make sure that you're there with me. I don't have any makeup dates out there, and we'll have to do something different if you can't come. But I look forward to seeing you all as usual in at Wayne Community College on Saturday. What day in October is that?
The 5th?
October the 4th. We'll be there, the 4th and the 5th. All right. Thank you for joining me tonight. I will see you in about 9 days. Everybody have a good week till then. Thank you for
All
joining
right.
me tonight. Goodbye.
Bye.